Hello, you're listening to Storytelling Saga, the podcast that shares stories. I'm your host, Allie, and this week I'm discussing Modern Family, created by Steve Levitan and Christopher Lloyd. The series premiered on ABC on September 23, 2009. It ran for 11 seasons with a total of 250 episodes, and the two-part series finale aired on April 8, 2020. So I shared this anecdote when I discussed New Girl, because the same way I got into that show, that's how I got into this show as well. So I had, several years ago, I had submitted a spec script I wrote to several contests, and for one of the contests, one of the perks was getting to speak to a TV industry person. So when I spoke to him over the phone, one of the things he strongly advised me to do was to read as many comedy pilots as I could. And one of the ones he suggested was New Girl. Another show he suggested was Modern Family. And I had heard of Modern Family, but I never really gave it a chance. So when I read the pilot, I was immediately impressed by the writing and how realistic the characters were. And then watching the pilot, it's a really strong pilot. I watched it recently again. I hadn't seen it it's been years, so rewatching it, it really is such a great pilot. And I love also the fact that when you first watch the show with just that pilot, how we're introduced to each family unit, and then at the end it's revealed, like with that last scene, it's revealed that they're all part of the same family. That was just so clever to me when I first read that. I was like, oh wait, so they're siblings and that's their dad? I thought that was really cool. So, of course, breaking down the families, with really the patriarch of the family, Jay Pritchett, played by Ed O'Neill, and then his wife, this is now his second marriage, and her second marriage too. He's married to Gloria Delgado Pritchett, played by Sofia Vergara, and then her son, Manny Delgado, played by Rico Rodriguez, and then you have the Dunphy family, with Claire Dunphy, Jay Pritchett's daughter, played by Julie Bowen, and then her husband, Phil Dunphy, who is my favorite character. I love Phil, played by Ty Burrell, and then their children, Haley Dunphy, played by Sarah Hyland, Alex Dunphy, played by Ariel Winter, and Luke Dunphy, played by Nolan Gould. And then you have Mitchell Pritchett, Claire's younger brother and Jay's son, played by Jesse Tyler Ferguson, and then his partner, Cameron Tucker, played by Eric Stonestreet. And then in the pilot, when they adopted their little girl, who at first was actually played by twins, but then season 3, she was recast, Lily Tucker Pritchett, played by Aubrey Anderson Emmons. And then later on in the show, when Jay and Gloria have another son, Fulgencio Joe Pritchett, played by Jeremy Maguire. And then also, right at the pilot too, Haley's on-again, off-again boyfriend, really, Dylan Marshall, played by Reed Ewing. But he's just more of a, like, by the last season, then he was always a recurring character, but was more of a guest star throughout the show until then he became, for the final season, part of the family officially. But I really do love the pilot because it's got the humor to it, and just breaking down each of these families, how you got just the core nuclear family of the Dunphys and their kids, and then you have now a new blended family with Jay and Gloria, and then with Gloria's son. So then really Jay is like a step down. He's kind of being a father all over again now with a younger kid. And then with Cam and Mitch, the gay couple, and at this point they aren't married yet, but they had been dating for a number of years, and they adopt their baby girl. So at the time, this show was progressive because you have a gay couple, but nowadays, now that's like, as they have said about this show, that it kind of, like, that's not considered progressive anymore. Like, that's the norm, as it should be, because gay marriage now, it's been legal for years in the US, but that was another benchmark of the show too, when gay marriage became legal, and then that was in the show when then they had gotten engaged. But this show too, though, it was, it had a lot of success, obviously. 11 seasons, that's fantastic for a show. 250 episodes, that's incredible. But it won a lot of Emmy Awards. Some of the actors had won. I know Ty Burrell won for playing Phil. Julie Bowen had won for playing Claire, and several other of the actors. But in particular, for the series itself, it won for 5 consecutive years. It won an Emmy Award for Outstanding Comedy Series. So from 2010 to 2014, and then after that, then it started going to other shows. Then it was Veep, I know. And like, with Emmys, it's kind of like the same shows always win. I know Fleabag won last year. But with any running show, then it kind of gets to a point where it's past its prime, and when things kind of feel predictable, things feel overused or repeated with certain storylines, things like that. But those early seasons, they are truly wonderful with the humor and with the heart to it. I always love shows like that. And this show with its format, with the mockumentary format, that nowadays too feels outdated, frankly. But back then, when they just really used it as a storytelling tool, that this is the format of the show, because originally the show was called My American Family, and the premise for the documentary format was that they had a foreign exchange student stay at the Dunphy household, evidently, this Dutch kid. So now he is grown up, and now he's a filmmaker. So now he is just this Dutch filmmaker, and he is filming about his American family when he stayed with them. So that was the original premise that they just never addressed in the show, that just they did away with, because this is one of those shows where, similarly with a show, for instance, Parks and Recreation, where they never explain who is filming, they never explain, it's this documentary, nothing like that at all. Unlike with The Office, where they really did that, especially with the last season. That whole thing had a purpose with the documentary. But in this case, it's never explained. Parks and Rec, it's never explained. And it doesn't have to be. It's simply just the format for the show, that you have the scenes playing out, single camera comedy, and then they have the interviews. So they did that with Parks and Rec as well. But with the interviews, though, especially in the first season, you could see a little bit of the original premise with when they were asked questions a little bit, and then they would answer the questions. But then more often than not, they would have the monologue at the end that would kind of address each of the plots throughout the episode, whether they were connected in some way. So really, first it was establishing the families in those units, but then since this is an ensemble show, then mixing up the characters and having those interactions with all of these characters, that made it very unique too. So the pilot, what stands out to me is the whole thing with how Phil so Luke accidentally shoots his sister Alex with the BB gun, and then they decide, it's like, you shot her, so now your dad has to shoot you, that's the rules. And then when they go and write it on the calendar, it's like, okay, 4:15, shoot Luke. And it's like, okay, sorry buddy, it's on the calendar. And that whole thing is hilarious. And then when he's gonna shoot Luke, and then he's like, okay, the point is you're scared, so now you know. Then he accidentally shoots him anyway. And then when Haley walks out saying, Dad, you have to talk to Mom, she's freaking out because that's when she had Dylan over. And at that point in the first episode, he's a senior and she's 15 years old. So the mom's freaking out, and then she's like, Mom's acting crazy. He's like, well, honey, your mom isn't always cool about things like I am. And then he accidentally shoots Dylan. So stupid. But that's just funny to me. And then also establishing too, for instance, with Manny, how he's only 11 years old, but he's an old soul and he wants to woo that 16-year-old girl. But then when he writes that poem for her, and then he says, I wrote her a poem. It's like, I gave her my heart. She gave me a picture of me as a sheriff, or whatever he says when they're at the mall. And then you see how everyone mistaking Jay as Gloria's father, since obviously there's the age difference there. And then also with Cam and Mitch, when Mitch is holding Lily, and then they're like, she's so cute, you and your wife must be so proud. And then you see Cam sit next to him. So establishing that as well, people judging them and things like that. And even then when they present Lily, and that's iconic too, like a thing that stands out, sets the tone of the show, with Cam presenting Lily, holding her up, and Circle of Life playing, and it's so majestic and it's just so great. But then when Jay first was like, so you two broke up, well, Baby wasn't going to change that, so he misread it. But then he was saying, look, he basically apologizes, saying, look, I'm a father, I'm still screwing it up. He still doesn't know what he's doing, but he's trying. And then he said, let me see the little kids. She's one of us now. It's just really cute. So throughout the show, how for me watching it, the things that always captivated me and really resonated with me with this show, the things I loved the most about it, besides some of the funny scenes too, were all those really heartfelt stuff. Those are the things that maybe just really loved the show, like, to me, made it stand out more. And also what I appreciated about it, especially with these earlier seasons, again, how they feel like real people, because with what writers always do, taking from their lives. So these writers writing about their kids, their spouses, just the kind of things they deal with on a daily basis. So with a family comedy, how you have that relatability, and yet they do a lot of the whole things with misunderstandings, as you see in comedies, and conversations where they're having one conversation, but one person thinks it's one thing, one person thinks it's another, so it sounds inappropriate, things like that, which I talked about when I discussed, so because I'm going off on a tangent a little bit, but with this show, obviously, with the later seasons, to me, I'll just say right off the bat, they are forgettable. And the show kind of got flanderized with the character traits a little bit. That's what happens with many long-running shows. It's very rare for the show to maintain the same quality, obviously, with the first few seasons. Because with those, you're really just writing the stories you want to tell. And then when you get to, later seasons, it's like, okay, we already told all these stories. What else are we going to do with these characters? So I'm not going to get into the things that I don't like about the show, because as I've said before on this podcast, I like to just generally just focus on the things I love. So with this show, I could certainly get into things that I don't love, especially in the later seasons, but I'm keeping this, celebrating the show. This was a wonderful show. I think it will definitely, when you look back on it, people will definitely appreciate it still. But again, with any show, that the quality, unfortunately, it didn't maintain throughout, that's just how it is with long-running shows for the most part. Similarly, of course, another one with The Big Bang Theory, for instance. But with this show, though, there are certain episodes that no matter how many times I watch them, they can still always make me laugh, always make me smile, always make me tear up. So those are the things that I appreciate about it. So when I first started watching the show, though, it was right after season 5 had ended. So then I started watching it each week with season 6 onward. And in my opinion, starting with season 6, that's when the show started getting to be hit or miss with the episodes. That's just my personal opinion. But seasons 1 through 5, to me, they maintains the quality. There's still just comedy gold in them. There's still so many heartfelt, emotional moments, just the poignant storytelling, really clever things. That said, though, in the later seasons, there are some clever storytelling too. But for the most part, that's just when, as the series progressed, it just wasn't as good anymore, to be perfectly honest. Again, that's just all my opinion, obviously. But looking back on season 1, for instance, right off the bat, one of my top 5 favorite hilarious moments throughout the entire show for me. When I say that, I mean no matter how many times I've seen it, it always makes me burst out laughing every single time. And I always say this, but I love that, because I love when you can watch something so many times and yet no matter what, it still always makes you laugh. That's just such a wonderful thing. So in the season 1 episode, The Incident, when Dylan sings his song for Haley, oh my god, just thinking about it makes me laugh. When he sings his beautiful, beautiful song, and the official title of it is In the Moonlight, parentheses, Do Me. That song is absolutely glorious. It's just so fantastic when he starts singing the song, and it just sounds really nice at first. And then when he's just when he gets into it, 'cause baby, I just want to do you. And then one by one, so the whole family is sitting there, and Haley's like, this is a song I wrote for Haley. It's called In the Moonlight. And I'm like, oh, it's a beautiful title, Dylan. So then when he starts playing, they first start enjoying it. The family is like, okay, we'll give him a chance, because Claire in particular was wary of Haley going to a concert with him overnight or something. So then when she's like, okay, maybe he is a really kind, nice guy, I'll give him a chance. So then when he's singing his song, and the whole family is there listening, and then when he gets to that part, I just want to do you. And then one by one, when their facial expressions change, you see the look of horror on Claire's face. You see Phil his lips in a straight line, and then just the kind of he's withholding anger, and he's just oh no, oh god, why? And then you see my favorite, Jay, when he just tilts his head and scrunches his eyebrows, is this kid serious? Obviously, as I'm explaining this, it's not as funny because, I'm just explaining it to you. It's obviously much more fun if you watch it for yourself. So if you if you haven't seen this show, look up that scene because it's so hysterical. And then you see, like, Mitch and Cam, and then they kind of, like, trying to, like, cover Luke's ears and eyes because he's just a young kid. It's just so anytime, no matter how many times I've seen that, it makes me burst out laughing. It's so hysterical to me. It never ceases to make me laugh. And then when they're just like, she's not going, not a chance in hell. But then the tag scene is hilarious when they're just all singing it then to themselves, like getting ready, brushing their teeth. They're all singing lines from the song. So that's hilarious. I also love the episode Coal Digger because early on in these earlier episodes, establishing those kind of a little bit tension with certain characters. For instance, with Jay and Phil, how Phil is always trying to kind of still win over Jay as his father-in-law, and Jay always just kind of having a little bit of contempt, a little bit of resentment towards Phil because Phil and Claire had married young because Claire had gotten pregnant with Haley's and they had married young. So he always kind of had that little bit of like, oh, you took my baby girl away from me, a little bit like that. So always that little tension there. And yet Phil's just such a nice, sweet, caring guy. So the reason I love Phil, first off, is that he is a wonderful father. And yes, he is like kind of like that dopey dad trope a little bit, but he's so genuine. And he's just a respectable guy, but he's just like kind of clumsy at times. But he's just like, in his earnestness, he tries very hard. And he can be very goofy, but it all comes from a place of love. So he's hilarious, but he's also like a very warm character. So that's why I love Phil. That's why he's my favorite. And throughout the show, to me, he was always consistent. He never got flanderized. But I love the episode Coal Digger too, because they say coal digger when really Claire had meant gold digger. So really also with that episode, showing that tension a little bit with Claire and Gloria. How Claire basically is judging Gloria because she's much younger than Jay, and that Jay being Claire's father. So she kind of is like, oh, this woman just married my dad for his money. So when she's saying, oh, like when Luke then accidentally spills the beans, saying like, oh, my mom called your mom a coal digger, but then really she meant gold digger. And then at the end when they basically finally make up, and then Claire's saying, what do I have to do to prove myself to you? Do I have to like jump in your pool? And she's like, yes. You gotta like make a fool of yourself to prove to me that you genuinely didn't mean that you do think of me as your family. And then when she's like, oh, fine. Then she just does it. And she's like, oh, do you? Then she's like, yes, I forgive you. So it's like a sweet thing, like a sweet gesture. And then throughout the show too, that they really become friends too. And then all the holiday episodes are great. The first Halloween episode in season 1 is hilarious when they do that whole thing with the haunted house. And Gloria feeling self-conscious about her accent, and when she's purposely being over the top with an accent, she's saying, oh, welcome to your nightmare. That whole thing is funny. The first Christmas episode, I love that one, Undeck the Halls. A funny thing, though, the plot with Cam and Mitch, when the mall Santa had gotten fired, and then they felt bad because they had made a comment saying, like, oh, he doesn't look like Santa or whatever, so then they felt bad, and then they invited the guy over so he can do his laundry, and they can just give him a meal. And then at one point when Jay came over to drop off their presents, they go, it's pajamas, because he likes doing his traditions every year. He's just a very traditional guy who, as throughout the show out, it's like, well, he's not so open-minded in terms of fully accepting his son as gay. But then, like, in an inopportune thing, when he's like, oh, so you don't accept my lifestyle, whatever. And then when the guy playing the Santa, he was just staying with them as he did his laundry and stuff. And then when he was going to, like, help them make the swing for the baby. So then when at one point it's like, oh, you don't, like, you don't accept my lifestyle. And then, of course, then he walks out saying, oh, so he wants to try the swing. And he's just not wearing a shirt. So it comes off as, like, sexual, but really, just things like that. It's just so funny. And then I also love the first Valentine's episode, My Funky Valentine, because that introduces us to, which became a recurring thing, with Claire and Phil's alter egos, just when they do their little role-playing with Clive Bixby and Juliana. And then also throughout the show, they did a lot of stuff with them going on vacation, which they would actually go to these locations. So one of which was Hawaii in season 1. Another one, they went to Australia in a later season. And in the final season, they went to Paris. So that's really cool. But when they go to Hawaii, that one is so funny too, with then that whole thing with when Phil ends up lying on top of Jay in the hammock, and then Jay's like, oh no, my back, don't move. And it's like, then they're just swinging back and forth in the hammock with Phil awkwardly on top of him, and then Jay can't move because of his back. It's just so dumb. But you see, like, the kids getting, like, in particular in that episode when Haley goes and gets drunk, and then Claire and Phil are trying to have a second honeymoon, but the kids are just fighting. And then at one point when Manny and Luke were just arguing, because kind of like when they're just staying in the room together, and like the odd couple with Manny being neat and clean and Luke being the messy one. And then when they're arguing, and then Phil at one point, when he goes, kids, we don't care. And then that one too, it ends with like a nice cute thing when Phil's like, oh, we couldn't have a second honeymoon because we couldn't have a honeymoon because we never had a real wedding. And then like they have like their little wedding ceremony with them renewing their vows, and it's so cute. And she's like, oh my God. And then Phil's saying, I can't tell if you think this is cool or weird. It's like, I think it's very cool. And it's just really cute. And really just some of the really hilarious stuff in this show. What you do in sitcoms a lot, like the misunderstandings, but they would do it really well in this show, especially in these earlier seasons. In season 2, for instance, in the episode Strangers on a Treadmill, that's great, first off, because basically an homage to Strangers on a Train, when they each are going to murder the other person that they want them to murder. But instead, so then like they explain it with Claire and Mitch, and then they're saying, oh, you talk to my husband, I'll talk to your partner about like something that they need to talk to them about. Phil with his jokes, and Cam with his shorts that reveal too much, and it's just so funny. So then Claire goes to talk to Mitch, and Claire goes to talk to Cam, rather, and Mitch goes to talk to Phil, and of course doesn't go as planned. But then in the plot with Jay and Gloria, when they go to, he thinks it's like a birthday party for one of his employees, but it turns out to be a quinceañera. And then when he's talking, he's like, I'm going to pick up the tab. It's like, oh, it's a beautiful occasion. And then, oh, right, this is about, oh no, he thinks it's a quinceañera, but actually it's an engagement party. That's right. So then when he's talking, and it's like, okay, so, oh, right, it's about these two who love each other so much. It's like, oh, it's about this man who loves his little girl so much. And actually, it's the engaged couple dancing. And of course, she's wearing a pink dress, so it's if it's a quinceañera. And then when they're dancing and they're getting to handsy, he's like, oh, I used to remember holding my little girl, but not like that. And they start kissing. He's like, slow down, muchacho. No, you're applauding this? It's so stupid that he thinks it's inappropriate, but really it's because it's an engaged couple. So just things like that. It's just so dumb. Another like ridiculous misunderstanding. This too makes me, it's just so ridiculous, makes me laugh. In the episode Our Children, Ourselves, when Mitchell mistakes this woman that he had been with before, when he was still coming to terms with his sexuality, so he had slept with her, and then he thinks, when he sees her like give a kiss to this person with red hair, and he thinks, oh my God, did she have a son? Is that my biological son? So then they think that that's his son. And then when they're talking to her, and then she's like, you didn't know Mitchell, like, we didn't have a relationship anymore. And then he's like, well, we just want to meet him. You want to meet Bobby? So we brought him a gift. So, of course, she doesn't, like, you know, again, one of those conversations when they're both having the same conversation, but they think it's about, oh, that's his son. But then, of course, she doesn't know that. So then when she's like, okay, Bobby, and then he walks out, and it's not a kid. He's a little person. So then it's like, oh, so then she's like, they got you a gift. And then they're like, oh, wait, oh, that's not. And then he takes out the gift, and it's a baseball mitt that says Little Slugger. And he's like, Little Slugger? So as if, like, they unintentionally insulted this man. So that's so terrible, because I thought it was Mitchell's son. That's so ridiculous, too. My goodness, that's so funny, though. And another one in season 2 also, Caught in the Act, when the kids walk in on Phil and Claire in bed on their anniversary. So then when poor Phil and Claire are mortified, they're like, oh, how are we going to talk to our kids now? And like, what are we going to say to them? And then when Gloria and Jay come over, and Gloria's she thinks like she had sent an email accidentally, when she wrote an email, or Jay accidentally sent it to Claire about, oh, it's like, I don't want to do this with you, this cupcake fundraiser thing, because you're too bossy and controlling. So then she wants to go there and erase the email before Claire saw it. So then when she's talking to them, it's like, oh, where's your mother and father? It's like, oh, she's very upset, and she thinks it's about the email. But then, of course, then they think it's about her talking about the kids catching them in bed. And then when she's saying, oh, it happened to me with another woman, it hurt a lot. It's like, why don't you just come and taste my cupcakes? Then this just like sounds so inappropriate, just so stupid. But then she's talking about literal So just, things like that is just so funny, though, because it sounds so sexual, but really it's just something, a classic misunderstanding. And they just did clever things, too, though. Things that were just so funny, like with so many visual gags, too. Even also, for instance, in See You Next Fall, with Alex's middle school graduation, and Haley wanting to tell her, like, don't give that speech just because you think you're better than everyone. You don't want to feel like an outcast and feel like you're better than everyone. You just want to tell them, like, oh, don't stop believing, get this party started. So then when she does do that, then with her speech. But then when Claire and Phil are just desperate to get there in time, because they're like, oh, another one leaving us, because then she's going to grow up and hate me the way Haley does. So she's feeling like she's losing her little girl. But then when she's like, oh, but she's middle child, we have to go get to that graduation, otherwise she'll never forgive us. And then when they just hitch a ride with the gardener guy, it's like, oh, mi nombre es Felipe. He's like, I speak English. Just so stupid, terrible. It's like, oh, muchas gracias. He's like, you're quite welcome. Terrible. But then when they are just desperate to get there, and then they just end up rolling down the hill. That's so ridiculous, too. They're just like tumbling down. It's just so funny. But then again, like, it has that nice heartfelt thing at the end with Alex's speech. And they always did clever things, too. Also, in the season 2 finale, the one that got away, when it was Jay's birthday, and then they had clips throughout previous episodes, which was clever. Claire with the stop signs, and then saying, oh, Dad, the kids need you. And then when Haley's dressed up for Halloween, and then you see Luke wearing the astronaut helmet or whatever, and then you hear, like, the smoke detector chirping in that episode Chirp, when it just keeps going off. So like all those things. And then also Mitchell doing practicing the dance for the flash mob that he did in an episode. So it was all moments that we didn't see from other episodes. So that was just like a clever thing, how it's like, oh wait, this past year from previous episodes, like, oh, remember this? But here's like a little thing that he was trying to film something. So then at the end, when he just puts together this like botched video, and it's just like, Jay, Dad, we love you so much, capiche? It's just like a botched together to make this like poorly done video for his birthday. It's just funny. And then season 3, one of my favorite episodes, Little Bo Bleep, with Lily swearing, and they go to the wedding, and then the whole thing with Claire running for town council, and she has to do the debate with the councilman, and the whole scene when they are prepping her, the Dunphys. So you got the kids, and then Phil pretending to be the opponent, and then they are honking the horn and like buzzing the buzzer. It's like, oh no, saying all these things like, oh, no eye rolling, no scorning, no finger pointing, no like all this stuff. And then she ends up doing all of that. It's like, oh, all this stuff, like, oh, wrong side of your face, like all these things. And like during the debate too. So that whole scene's so funny. And the whole scene in the debate too, when she's kind of like melting down, she's like, he has done nothing but, she's pointing at him, and she just keep like moving her hands and like turning her head, like trying to remember all the things that they told her. So that's just great, too. I love all that, too. And I also love the episode when they go to Disneyland, and then when Dylan, at one point, when he's working there at Disneyland, then he's in the costume, and then he's just like, do I look like I'm joking? Just zooms in on him in the costume. So stupid. Oh, my God. But I also love when they tackle a bit of heavier topics a little bit. For instance, also in season 3, in Virgin Territory, when Phil finds out that Haley had lost her virginity to Dylan, and then he basically, when the whole thing with Lily's doll, it's like, oh, the doll's injured, we gotta get her better, and then like it's this conversation about the doll, but really talking about Haley. He's saying, oh, well, the doll's different now, so it won't be the same, and then she's saying, well, it's still her little doll, and then when he basically says at the end that he trusts her, when she's like, oh, should we get a table? It's like as if they're talking about something simple, but what they're really talking about is he trusts her, that's it. So it's a sweet thing, talking about, I know you lost your virginity, but I trust you. I know you'll make the right decision. Things like that. So it's just really clever. I also love the episode Leap Day, which actually aired on a leap day. So that's cool. And that's when they made it that it was Cam's birthday. Then he just wants to be 10, but he's 40 years old. And then Mitch wanted to do the perfect birthday party for him. And he said, he's been telling me all along, he wants to be 10. They're just on the rides. And they do the whole thing with how Claire, Alex, and Haley were all had their periods at the same time, and then it's like they're going, like, saying all this stuff. It's like, oh, you're all menstruating. And then at the end, Phil, the only thing he wanted to do was doing his trapeze thing, and then like they all get angry. It's like, oh, excuse me, we just missed the deadline, like you could just let him use it. And then he's saying, I know that's how they thanked me, because earlier he did the whole thing with, oh, I'm so hungry and I'm so in pain and I'm nauseous, and then it's like all the stuff happening to him when you're on your period, and then it's like they all hug him. It's like, yeah, now you get it, this is how we feel, it sucks. And they had so many great guest stars throughout this show. For instance, there were a great recurring character. Well, he was like a jerk, but he was always funny though. With Phil's like rival realtor guy, Gil Thorpe, played by Rob Riggle. He's great, Rob Riggle, in like anything he does. And Elizabeth Banks as Mitch and Cam's friend Sal, who never like truly outgrew her party girl phase. She's so funny. Matthew Broderick guest starred in an episode in season 4 in Mystery Date. Another classic misunderstanding, with Phil thinking he's just having a friend over, and then Matthew Broderick, his character, being gay, and then thinking that he's on a date with Phil. Then he's like, oh, Phil saying like, oh, my wife knows about this. Yeah, as long as I clean up afterwards, she's fine. And then when Matthew Broderick's, I don't remember his name, so when he's talking to Cam, he's like, oh, so this guy like has a weird arrangement. He's like, oh, it's fine. It's just like so funny. And then like he's just misinterpreting everything. And then when he's just wanting him over to watch the game, it's just so funny though. Another great one in season 4, the future Dunphys. And oh my gosh, it's just a funny scene. But first off, it's great how like when Claire injures herself or whatever, something with her heart, so then like she's at the hospital and they see these 3 people who look like they're an older version of their kids, and then seeing like, oh wait, this is their future, are these kids going to be like all screwed up? And at the end, when then there's 3 younger kids, don't give us those judgmental looks like, wait another 15 years. But that scene too has another one of the most hilarious scenes to me, because again, it's so like unintentionally off color, but it's just so funny. When they're at the restaurant, it's Mitch, Cam, and then Gloria, and with Lily. And then they're talking about Lily wanting to be in touch with her Vietnamese roots, and Gloria feeling like she's losing touch with her heritage, with her children. And then she's saying, they're just going to grow up and become boring old white people. And then old white people walk by, a couple of old white people. And then Cam says, most of our friends are white. And then a black couple behind them is giving them a look. It's so terrible. Oh my goodness. And then at the end of that scene, when Mitch says, I really think that keeping in touch with your heritage only enriches our culture. And then Cam says, absolutely, I think we would all be better off if people would go back to where they came from. And then everyone in the restaurant gives him a look. So it's like he's being unintentionally racist. It's terrible. Oh my God. And then Mitch is just like, I'll bring the car around. He's like, yes. Poor Cam. I also love in season 5 when Claire is trying to surprise Phil with a romantic gesture for their wedding anniversary, but because Phil is always so great with the wedding anniversary gifts, but then he was going to surprise Claire with a song when they were at this fair, and then she's like, oh, Phil, we gotta go. She wants to give him the present that she had for him, which is like Chinese acrobats. That's at the end. But then when she's like, oh, Phil, I might throw up, and then in an interview he says, no one throws up until I sing. So stupid. I also love in season 5, The Late Show, when they just start trying to all go to that restaurant, but then they keep getting kicked out. At one point when they say that Haley is babysitting, she's babysitting Manny, then Luke, and the baby, Joe. And then Gloria's like, oh, Haley with all those boys, what's she gonna do? And then it cuts to them just karaokeing, singing Midnight Train to Georgia. And at the end, when then Jay's like, oh, it's my favorite song, and then when they just end up eating tacos from a taco truck, and then they just start singing the same song again, Midnight Train to Georgia. That's really cute. And another fantastic episode, definitely like a fan favorite of the show, and just a notable episode of the show, Las Vegas, when all of those storylines tie together so hilariously. Again, it's like all those misunderstandings, and that's another great guest star, Stephen Merchant, playing the like butler guy, Higgins. They did like a sequel to it, basically, like another episode in this final season with the Prescott, so they had him back, but it was done much more cleverly in this episode, Las Vegas. Just all the ridiculous things of everyone going in and out of the hotel rooms, and also Fred Armisen is in that episode. That's so funny. That one's fantastic. I also love in season 6, Haley's 21st birthday is really funny when Phil is trying to get her a car, and then the guy's like walking out, or like he's like, come on Phil, we'll get a better car, and then he's like, Phil, and then Phil's just like, no, like it's just so stupid. He's torn trying to get a good deal, and then of course he ended up having the good deal, and then Jay like didn't want him to know that he just like paid the difference to get the car anyway, since you made a big fuss about, oh well, we're just gonna walk. But I also love, speaking of Haley, also in the episode Queer Eyes Full Hearts, when she wants to get a new job. And there's just a great scene at the end of that episode when first she had walked into the office and then went up to the reception desk and was just asking the woman, like, oh, I'm here to see Gavin Sinclair. And then the woman's like, not today, he's in a mood. Kay. And then afterwards she's beating herself up like, Kay? Who says Kay? So stupid. And then a car honks at her and she's like, go around, I'm not going anywhere. So this whole scene when she's just screaming, I'm not going anywhere. And first she's like, I'm not going anywhere, I'm not going anywhere, I'm not going anywhere, I'm not going anywhere. So it turns from a literal, I'm not going anywhere, I'm not moving my car, to I'm not going anywhere, like the realization I'm not going anywhere in life, to that I'm not going anywhere, you're not going to stop me, I'm going to get this job. So I love that, just that one phrase, you know, depending on the inflection, the way you say it, all those different meanings to it. And then she ends up getting the job, so good for her. And then throughout the show, so obviously we know as it ends, she ends up marrying Dylan and gets pregnant. And I know for a fact that the actress wasn't really happy with that, and I get that. And I know for a fact fans, and even her in particular, the actress Sarah Hyland, she was rooting for, and most fans are rooting for, Haley and Andy Bailey, played by Adam Devine. And they couldn't like have him on the show because it was conflicts with his films and things like that. So unfortunately it didn't work out having him on the show, as because they wanted to have him on and I guess eventually marry Haley and maybe them have kids. But unfortunately it didn't work out. So the whole thing with Haley and Andy, I did like them together. I liked that like first when they introduced him. So he starts off, he's a male nanny for Joe. So working for Jay and Gloria. But then you see already like how him and Haley clashing, and the whole thing, well, it's like then she's starting to develop feelings for him clearly, but even though he's like this goofy guy, he's kind of a young Phil, but he was dating Beth, that girl Beth, and then they end up getting engaged. So then I didn't like the way Haley and Andy got together, because then in the episode Phil's sexy house, she runs up and kisses him, but he was with Beth still at the time, so I didn't like that they were cheating. And then they did a whole cop-out with Beth saying, oh, actually, I've been cheating on you too. So like he didn't even get to say anything. Basically, he got away with it. And then they had dated, though, Haley and Andy. So I did like the two of them together. I just didn't like how they got together, but I was rooting for them too. But at the same time, I know then she went on to date Rain or Shine. That's his name, Rain or Shine. That older weatherman guy. And then that was a weird thing because then like he had a teenage daughter, so then she kind of saw a little bit how this is what her mom dealt with when she was a teenager. So Haley in particular did go through good character growth, but then it kind of regressed a little bit because then she got back with Dylan. Even though Dylan, like, he is this bumbling idiot, really. A funny thing with Dylan that I like is in season 7 in an episode She Crazy. There's an arc in that season when they have little ducklings, and it's really cute in the Dunphy house. But when he's explaining ducklings and he's like, oh, ducklings, their brains are so small, they imprint on their mother and just follow them around until they find food. And then as he's saying that, he's following Haley around, and then she just gives him a plate of food and he's like, yum. So literal, like he's a duckling. So she had dated Dylan on and off, and then it's like she had grown up from that relationship since he was her first love, really. But obviously that wasn't meant to be endgame in a show. But then it circled back to Dylan because then at one point then he was married to someone else, which is like, that's so random. And then he ended up becoming a nurse, so he kind of grew up, but he was still always like kind of the dumb boyfriend. But so I did like Haley and Dylan though. It's like if it couldn't be Andy, I'm glad it was Dylan, even though people argue with that, saying, well, kind of regressed her character. But, it's unfortunate that it couldn't be Andy, but at the same time, it worked out that it came full circle with her and Dylan, that they always loved each other, obviously, on some level. So with me, I will say, like, yes, I did like Haley and Andy, but I wasn't, I kind of was over it then. I was like, oh, I'm so upset this ship didn't happen, because this show kind of wasn't really about that. It's more about the family dynamics, obviously. So, I know it wasn't necessarily what everyone liked for Haley, that it's like what happened to her career and things like that. That's another criticism about this show, too, with lots of dropped storylines. But also another quick thing with the ducks, so with that storyline, in the episode Spread Your Wings, when it's kind of symbolism for Alex away at college at that point, and then Phil realizing he has to let go, since, we gotta set the ducks free. And then when they, release the ducks, as if the ducks are like them, Haley, Luke, Alex. And then when they release the ducks, it's like, we made a mistake, let's get them back. And then they sees all the other ducks in the pond. And then Luke says, what the hell, does everyone get rid of their ducks here? Says Tom, no, it's just ducks. Obviously, ducks in a pond. Oh, goodness. And then I also want to touch upon some episodes that deviated from the typical A, B, and C storyline with this show, especially in the earlier seasons when they would come together with some kind of emotional monologue and just a voiceover that kind of tied together each of the storylines. But for instance, one that really stands out as a fan favorite and a critically acclaimed episode in terms of the way the episode is structured is the season 6 episode Connection Lost, because that one is entirely done just with the computer screen, and you just see the characters doing their video chats and FaceTiming throughout the whole episode. So it's the whole thing online, as if it's on Claire's computer screen, and then seeing each of the family members just as if they are talking to them through video chat and things like that. And it's the whole plot with Claire thinking that Haley had gotten married to Andy, but then it turns out it was a whole misunderstanding. But that one's just really cleverly done, one that really stands out, and one that was just really cleverly executed. And I also like ones where instead of the typical A, B, and C story all interspliced, that they would do instead, once in a while, linear storytelling. So for instance, in season 4, the Valentine's episode in that season, Heartbroken, when instead of the A, B, and C stories all mixed together, going back and forth between them, instead they had it with each storyline just separately. So first it was February 13th, and it was just with the Dunphy house. So that whole storyline, the whole thing with a health scare with Claire's heart. And then on Valentine's Day with Jay and Gloria, so that was a whole story. And then the day after, that was its own story with Mitch and Cam having had a party. And then that's just a funny moment too, though, when Dylan was going to crash with them, and then he wrote a song, and then that song's so funny too. Never thought I'd be at my ex-girlfriend's uncle's house with the tiny pink panther. And you see their cat Larry, and they had dyed him pink. It's so cute. Oh my goodness. But also another clever one to me from season 2, Regrets Only, when Claire is angry at Phil, and we don't know why. And throughout the whole episode, they're trying to figure out why, and there's all these different reasons. And we keep going back to when she had gotten angry with him, and then, Phil trying to figure it out, and when Gloria was cutting his hair, and then, when at one point she's like, oh, if you give me a message this tiny, I kill you. But then it turns out she was... So it's just clever because it's just, you keep going back to the moment trying to figure out, oh, maybe it's this reason, maybe it's this reason. But then it turns out she was angry because he had tried a salad that she had been saying he should try for years, but then when his friend told him, then he finally did. So it's just a simple thing of, you never listened to me, and then now all of a sudden, when I've been telling you this for years, or something like that. So that was just clever too. Another one similar to that kind of structure from season 6 also, The Day We Almost Died, because they had almost gotten into a car accident, and then they keep going back to that moment, and then one by one showing how each of them was affected by it throughout the day. With Claire, how then she wants to live in the moment, and then she goes rollerblading with Mitchell. And then Phil, when he decides to buy that alpaca that he's always wanted, because then that was a callback to when he had bought an alpaca. And it's oh, it's an alpaca. I got the last one, Jolene. So then this one he has Jolene too. And then you see also with Manny how that affected him. They keep going back to it again, how they had almost gotten to the car accident. And then also with Haley and Alex, when Alex thinks that Haley had saved her, but then it turns out she just wanted her phone. That's just so, oh goodness. But another one, though, similarly with the linear storytelling with just each separate plot panning out, is 5 Minutes from season 8. And that one's clever because each storyline is told in real time in just 5 minutes. And it just says how, a lot can happen in 5 minutes. And then there's a plot with Mitch and Cam, how they had taken a pill before going on the airplane that they were going to just sleep. It was just to relax them, an anti-anxiety type pill. But then when the plane is docked, So then they are just kind of all loopy, walking around the airport terminal. It's just so funny. And it's like, oh, we got to buy all these hats. And it's like, oh, wait, what's our daughter's name? Linda. That's right, Linda. Oh, goodness. And another plot is with Gloria and Jay. They're trying to find a parking spot. And another one is with Phil and Claire, and they go to visit Alex at college. And then the other one is with Haley, and at that point when she had been dating Rainer, and that's when they broke up. So that was just really clever the way that episode panned out as well. Another one I really like too is A Year of Birthdays from season 10. That's the season 10 finale. And that one is just reflecting on each of their birthdays over the past year. So it's kind of jumping around between all of those. And that's when Haley gives birth to the twins. And I love that one first off, the end of that episode, when Mitch and Cam presents the twins the same way they presented Lily the same way Cam presented Lily in the pilot with Circle of Life playing, and they hold up the babies and they're wearing matching robes. And watching that for the first time, I got emotional because meaningful callbacks always get to me, and it was just such a cute, sweet thing, and just a nice homage and like a nice callback to the pilot. It's just really cute, very, very sweet, very emotional. And also, though, a funny thing in that episode, well, it's funny when Phil had decided he's going to learn piano because at that point he had turned 50 years old, and he was just saying, well, I think it's never too old to learn something new. And then when he was just starting to play, and then you hear Haley like, oh, he's like, thank you. He's like, no, Haley's in labor. And then he just like quickly, the kid's like, oh, of course, now you're not going to play. Like, and then he just goes up and plays for release really quickly. So that one's just really great. Also, another funny thing in that one, when Alex had turned 21, but then, so she just went out at the bar, but then Haley was just there. She couldn't drink, obviously, being pregnant. She's just sitting there sober, watching Alex wasted. And then she's like, you know what? I'm going to tell, when she had been dating that guy, the fireman at the time, I'm going to tell him to go get me pregnant. And then she's like, no, you know what? It's 2000 something. I'm going to get him pregnant. Oh, goodness. So funny. And what's also great about this show is that they did so many great and clever visual gags. For instance, in season 1, the episode 15%, and it's just like a simple thing, but it's just really cute and clever. It's just like the things that the writers had come up with. When Phil teaches Haley how to use that universal remote because he had been trying to teach Claire, but she's so frustrated because he's talking to her like she's a toddler. And so then she's like, well, you got to teach our dumbest kid, Haley. So then he's teaching Haley. And then when she figures it out, and then when Claire's like, oh, well, what if I do this? And she just figures it out, Haley. And then she's so excited. And then what's on the screen is people celebrating, and then someone jumps into the person's arms. Then that happens, the same thing happening as happening on the screen with Haley so excited, they're both cheering, and then she jumps into Phil's arms. That's cute. And then later in the episode when Haley shows Claire how to use the remote, and then they figure it out, and then the same thing happens where on screen it's people cheering, and then they hug, and then the same thing, they put their arms up, the same like happening side by side with what's happening on screen and then in real time with Haley and Claire hugging. So it's just really cute. Another great one, though, they did a lot of stuff with wordplay, kind of a little bit, and with like writing. So, for instance, also in season 2, then, The Musical Man, a hilarious visual gag that always makes me laugh too. When Phil had placed an ad on their car, and then the full ad is, I can't be satisfied until you're satisfied. Phil Dunphy, realtor, family man. Let me make your dreams come true. So an ad for his real estate business. But then because of the way it was placed, then you see Claire on one side with I can't be satisfied, and then you see Haley on the other side with let me make your dreams come true. So as if they're like prostitutes, so it's so terrible. And then people honking, and then Claire's like, yeah, call the number. And then it's just so funny. And then when Phil at one point gets a phone call, and then it's like, oh, which one would you want? The little one? It's like, okay, well, I can. And then he's like, oh, both of them. Well, that'll give me a chance to give them a good scrubbing. And, oh, that's a good idea if you want to flip them. Like, things that sound inappropriate because of the ad. It's so dumb. And also in that episode when Luke had a school play, and then it's supposed to say, we love the world. But then because Luke was stuck up there, then it was like, we love the word, and then the L was missing because of Luke. And then when they lowered their sign that they had made, it just says the F, then it says, we love the F word. Things like that, so ridiculous. Another fantastic one in season 4, the episode Snip, when Phil is feeling self-conscious because he doesn't want to, like, feeling like he won't be a man with the whole thing, and like being nervous about getting a vasectomy, but then he ends up not going through with it. Like, they decide that they don't want to do that. But before, though, when Jay is talking to him and then trying to make him feel better about it, and there is another ad, coincidentally, Phil, for his real estate business, Phil Dunphy Realtor, and the full ad is not just another realtor, a man who cares. And then when Phil sits down on the bench, then the way the words are situated, when him covering it, then it just says, "not a real man." That's just, like, so clever and just, like, so ridiculous and dumb, but it's just so funny. But really, for me, though, what I love the most about this show are all of the really heartfelt, besides all the funny stuff, all the really heartfelt emotional moments. The things with the sisters in particular, with Haley and Alex, those kind of scenes particularly resonated with me. Because they did more of that with Haley and Alex, not so much with Luke, a little bit, but really it was like those two, and you see like their special bond as sisters. So for instance, even though they're so different, so in season 6, Crying Out Loud, that episode, when it's Alex's senior ditch day, and then like they just convince her to, well, they basically kidnap her, it's like so she can participate in senior ditch day, even though she's always so much a good student, doesn't do that kind of stuff usually. But then when they go to this old theater that Phil had helped restore, and then when he sees, like, in the cement blocks that it was Haley and Alex's old handprints or something, and then he wants to take that back as a keepsake, this old cement block, since it's an old rundown theater. And Haley is worried that, "Are you ever going to call me? Like, are they going to lose touch?" And Alex is saying, "I'm always going to need you," basically. And it's just, like, really sweet. And then when they just end up sitting side by side in the theater, and then they're watching Phil and Luke, and they're behind a screen, and they're doing all this kind of, like, slapstick stuff, and just, like, looks so ridiculous. And it's like, oh, it's like now we're just sitting here watching cartoons. And it's like a cute, really, really cute thing. So it's, like, emotional, but also funny. And also, again, in the episode Disneyland in season 3, that one has a nice emotional ending too, when Jay basically saying, like, in a voiceover, why he had stayed with his first wife Dee Dee for so long, and really it's because of the kids. And then it's just a cute thing where then, like, he puts his arm around Mitch and Claire, and they both lean against him. It's really cute. Another great one in season 3, Express Christmas, when they kept trying to just rush through Christmas because they were all going to be together. It was like the only day they were going to be together, then they were all going to be going on separate trips. And so then they try to, like, rush a Christmas, getting all the gifts, getting the dinner ready, and everything keeps going wrong, of course. And then Jay just says, "Okay, let's just cut our losses, go get food." And then when they all walk out, and then there's fake snow, so, like, he surprised them all with fake snow. It's just, like, a really cute, sweet, nice thing he did. Another great one in the episode Schooled, when they move Haley to her dorm for college. And then, of course, she ends up getting kicked out of college. But when they move her, when Claire and Phil are, like, moving her into her dorm, and Phil is wearing that t-shirt of the two of them, and then Haley when she was a little girl, and it says Haley Dunphy Moving Company. And the other great thing in that episode, so then at the end, though, then when, like, she's like she gets embarrassed by them, but then, like, she's kind of, then you see her at college, and she's just kind of, like, alone, like, doesn't know where to sit, and she just sits by herself. And then when you see her in her dorm, and then she ends up reading the book that Phil had given to her, Philosophy, which that's a whole other hilarious thing. But then when she's just, like, calls them and saying thanks for everything, and I love you guys, I miss you guys, and it's just, like, really cute and sweet, you know, it's just, like, a nice moment, because the whole time it's as if she's just like, I can't wait to be away from them. But then, of course, as soon as they're gone, she misses them. They're like, of course, we love you, sweetie. And it's just really cute. And the best thing, though, when before she was mortified about the shirt, then when she stands up, you see that she's wearing the shirt. And it's just really cute. But also, though, on a side note with that episode, with Philosophy, with Phil's fabulous book of life lessons, so amazing. I think we all need one of those. This is great. But some of his great, wonderful life lessons. Let's see, one is, always look people in the eye, even if they're blind. Just say, I'm looking you in the eye. Another great one, the most amazing things that can happen to a human being will happen to you if you just lower your expectations. Another one, take a lesson from parakeets. If you're ever feeling lonely, just eat in front of a mirror. And another great one, when life gives you lemonade, make lemons. Life will be all like, what? But another great emotional episode the season 4 finale, Goodnight Gracie, when Phil's mother passes away, but we never actually saw that character. It was just an off-screen character. And then on a side note, since I just brought that up, then they had, in the final season, they had Phil's father, and he's just like a grown Phil. They get along so well. They're both like into the same kind of goofy humor, which is cute. But they had him pass away, and it was kind of like just a rushed thing. It was just kind of, okay. It was emotional, but it was just kind of like, why'd you have to do that? And also then they had killed off Claire and Mitch's mother, Dee Dee, played by Shelley Long, and that was kind of like pointless too, but that was in season 10, but that was pointless too. But when they killed off Phil's mother, who we never met though, but it's just really emotional, and then with the whole thing with the funeral and the voiceover with Alex saying how, throughout the whole episode, saying how she'd been close with their grandmother, but that when she passed, and then she had given each of them a gift, and for her it was just, this is a lighter, and then she's like, I can't believe this, but then when the grandpa's like, it opens up, then when she opens up the note and she's reading it, and then she just does the sweet thing, it's like, my grandma would have loved this, and they're just having fireworks at the memorial service, and then the voiceover saying, this is a lighter, and that it was Paul Newman's, and then your grandpa saw me pick it up, and then it's like, every once in a while it's okay to break the rules, you never know what could happen. And it's just really emotional, really touching. It's just like a nice, sweet thing. And also with Alex, another really emotional episode in a different way is in season 5, Under Pressure, when Alex kind of has a breakdown when it's her Sweet 16. She's worried, she's stressed about the PSATs, the SATs, about what she's going to do for college, and all this pressure on herself. And then when they have an open house for the parents, and there's a whole great thing, though, on a side note, with Gloria, with having this rivalry with that woman, like Dr. Donna Duncan, and at one point Gloria's like Dr. Dudadada. It's so stupid, but it's just really funny, though, because then she uses a little bit of a recurring character, too. But when they're each kind of having to see what the kids do with their classes and stuff, and then Alex decides to go to therapy after her melts down, and then when she's talking to the therapist, and then the therapist is saying, why do you think you put so much pressure on yourself when your siblings aren't like that? And then she's saying, well, they don't, when talking about her parents and her family, she's saying, why do we have to bring them up? They don't get me. So she feels like very alone, and is putting so much pressure on herself. And then afterwards, when that whole day had played out, and then when Claire later was saying, oh honey, I don't know how you deal with all this, like I was just you for a couple of hours and it broke me seeing all this stuff you have to do. I don't know how you don't have a meltdown every day, something like that. And then when Alex just kind of breaks down and hugs her, and she's like, oh sweetie, is it okay? She's like, what did I say? Then she's just like crying, like, you said just what I needed you to say. So basically her finally understanding, seeing for herself what Alex goes through on a daily basis for herself, the kind of person who puts so much pressure on herself and wanting to do well. So it's just like an emotional thing in terms of, I finally understand what you're going through, because she always felt kind of ignored and alone. It's just like a really touching, real thing. And also a really nice thing that season with the first episode, Suddenly Last Summer, when Mitch and Cam end up proposing to their whole day, they're worried about how they want to get married, obviously, because that's when gay marriage becomes legalized, when that episode aired. And then when they're trying to figure out, it's like, oh, we got to propose, like each of them wants to surprise each other with a proposal. And then like throughout the whole day, they're trying to make it romantic, trying to surprise each other. And then at the end, they have to change a tire, and then they just are both on one knee, then they look at each other and they just say, yes. Very, very sweet. And then the season 5 finale, the wedding, when everything keeps going wrong, and it's just, they keep going to all these different venues, all this crazy stuff. That's also then when they were playing up more with the Haley and Andy romance. That's when it was just kind of getting started a little with him. They clearly had feelings for each other, but Haley was trying to figure out what she wants, and he's such a sweet guy. So that was cute too. But also the actual wedding itself, when first in the previous episode when Jerry was making comments, and then when Mitch just said, you know what, if you feel that way, then don't come to the wedding. And it was like really sad. So then when Jay ends up saving the day with them getting married at the golf club, and then he says, you know, Dad, you gotta take your seat. And Jay says, actually, I think you and I will just take a little walk. And he walks him down the aisle. And it's just very touching, and the whole thing. And then Phil officiates, and the whole time with him, he's trying to figure out, oh, so they say the best marriages take a little bit of magic, and he's going to do a magic trick, and then after all that, with like all his silliness, then he just says, They say the best marriages contain just a little bit of magic, and then he takes Claire's hand. He says, "Believe me, I know." So it was just a really sweet thing that they just went with the emotion of it, and it's just really touching. And then, of course, when Cam and Mitch get married, and it's so sweet and heartfelt, and with Claire delivering the speech as the best person, and it's just really, really sweet. And another great one, when they do family therapy in season 7, it's each of the couples, Jay and Gloria, Mitch and Cam, and Claire and Phil, in the episode Clean Out Your Junk Drawer. And then the whole time Claire's like, oh, we gotta win this therapy. And the therapy session is being done by Catherine O'Hara, who's fantastic as Moira Rose in Schitt's Creek, but that's for another episode. But they're kind of being competitive and all that stuff. And then afterwards, when Jay's not taking it seriously, but then all of a sudden he's talking about his father, and then just gets really emotional, and it's like, he had to know, right? Like, when he had passed, and he said, I didn't even cry. I mean, he had to know that I loved him, though, right? And it's just like, all of a sudden gets really touching. It's just really sweet, too. And I will say, though, that one of the best quotes in this entire show about relationships and just like the kind of people we need in our lives, and just a beautiful, beautiful quote in season 3, Punkin' Chunkin', when Cam says, there are dreamers and there are realists in this world. You'd think the dreamers would find the dreamers and the realists would find the realists, but more often than not, the opposite is true. You see, the dreamers need the realists to keep them from soaring too close to the sun. And the realists, well, without the dreamers, they might not ever get off the ground. That's just a beautiful, poignant quote. Another great moment I just reminded me with Mitch and Cam in the season 3 finale, when they had been trying this whole time because they wanted to adopt a baby boy, and then sadly it fell through. And then when they're lying on the ground, at one point when Mitch says, I think I'm lying on a rock, and then Cam just says, I'm lying next to my rock. And it's just really sweet and cute. So then in the series finale, the 2-part series finale, that's why it's great then with, even though they had gone back and forth throughout this whole series really, well, that whole time when they had wanted to adopt a baby boy, then it finally came through for them. It just worked out, the timing worked out and everything, and they were able to adopt a baby boy. They named him Rexford. And then with the final season, then when the whole thing with Cam, how he may have had a new job opportunity in Missouri, a coaching job, but then it fell through. But then of course in the finale, then all of a sudden the job was available again, so then they decided that they were going to move to Missouri. So it's great too, though, with the finale. First off, how it's each of the family units again, similar to the structure of the pilot, and then when they all came together for Cam and Mitch's housewarming party. But with the Dunphys, how they're going crazy because there are 3 kids, plus Haley and Dylan's twins, all living in the house, so they're going crazy. And then it's like, okay, one of you needs to move out. And then so it goes from all of them still living in the house to then all of them moving out, because Alex then, she was going to be going to Switzerland with her new research team. Also, there's a little bit of the romance with Arvin, that professor guy, but whatever. And then Luke gets into college. He's going to be going to the University of Oregon. And then Haley and Dylan end up getting a new place, and it turns out to be Mitch and Cam's old place. So then it goes from everyone together to then they're going to be all going their separate ways. Because then also Gloria and Joe, we're going to be going to Colombia over the summer. Manny's going to be taking a trip around the world with his dad over the summer. And then Jay had surprised Gloria with Spanish lessons. So, like, he had been learning Spanish. So it's great, though, how, with that in particular, how instead of, like, the misunderstanding being, like, some comical thing, it ended up having this emotional payoff with, he was, like, saying, like, oh, sorpresa, mi amor. Like, it's cute. Like, I'm learning Spanish for you. And it's, like, a sweet thing. And then when they were first, like, all hugging goodbye, and you hear, like, the Jay voiceover, then, like, their flight keeps getting delayed. Then the Dunphy kids kind of have their little goodbye when first Haley and Alex had decided they were going to mess with Luke with some video they did when they were younger about them wanting a dog, and they recreated with Luke as the dog Woofy. And then they were saying again, don't worry, we'll take care of him, and no matter what, it'll always be the 3 of us. And then Haley's like, the 3 of us. And then she stops the video and she says, you guys know you can always call me, right? And then Alex saying, yeah, and Switzerland's not that far. And Luke saying, well, and you'll help me with dating advice, right? And then when he gets up and then Haley just says, sit, and Alex says, stay. So it's like funny because he's dressed up as the dog, but then it's like an emotional thing too. And it just was very, very sweet. I liked that whole little goodbye with them too. And then Claire and Mitch having their moment when they want to get their skating trophy. And then they're just kind of like, let's one more time. Hungry like the wolf, doing their little skating routine. It's funny. And just like these little goodbyes. One more ridiculous thing with Phil accidentally spooning with Jay, because that's what he thought. But really, it's just because he's repeating phrases, learning them in Spanish. So it just comes off so funny, though. And then at the end, when they have that whole big group hug and the whole voiceover with Jay, but also too when like one by one with the kids moving out, like packing up their stuff, and then Claire reflecting, saying it's like, well, when we got married, and then all of a sudden 6 months later, because she had been pregnant with Haley, and then all of a sudden Haley walks in, wah, 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 Dylan, and then Alex walks in, so it's like saying goodbye in that sense too. Like they go from all the kids in the house to then it's just they're empty nesters now, and then they decide that they are going to just go on an RV trip, because Jay, with his advice to Phil, saying to be excited for your next chapter in your life. And then it's just a cute thing, though, when Claire says, they're really moving out, like, what are we going to do? And Phil just says, same thing we always do, leave the porch light on, let them know that they'll always have a home. So that whole last image, then when they all hug, they're saying their goodbyes, you hear Jay with the voiceover, and there's cute little homages to the pilot, with Mitch and Cam on the plane with Lily and Rexford, and they're eating cream puffs, and it was a callback to the pilot when some woman made a comment about cream puffs, and then it was literal cream puffs. And then Jay and Gloria are struggling to get out of the chairs at the soccer game, a callback to when Jay couldn't get out of the chair at the soccer game in the pilot. And then Phil marking the calendar, and then Claire just like fixing it, a callback to that in the pilot when they were writing when they're going to shoot Luke with the BB gun. And then the last image then with the lights all going off, but then with the Dunphy house the porch light goes back on, and it's a really sweet image because it's a relatable thing, like, oh, the light's on, letting you know that we're home. It's like a sign of, well, even though this family moving on to new adventures and new chapters of their lives, that they're still a family, that they always have a home here, will always be here for you to come back home, that it's not a goodbye, it's a see you later, that we'll be back together again for holidays, things like that, that it's, you know, we'll always be there for each other. It's just like a really, really sweet thing, so I really liked that as well. And then really the last image going through the Dunphy house, and then that photo on the wall that was taken in season 1, the family photo. And in that episode, how Claire wanted that picture to be perfect with everyone in their nice outfits, but then ended up being a mess. But that's what it really is with the family, that nothing's perfect. There's no such thing as a perfect family. So it just really is a lovely show. And good thing Phil finally fixed that step. Well, he didn't really ever fix that step, but, you know, the broken step, it'll always live on. Oh, and one other moment in the series finale I want to mention. I can't believe I forgot this, but I have to mention it because it also made me tear up. When they're all in that group hug and they don't want to let go, and Gloria says, why is this so hard for us? And Jay responds, because not everybody gets to have what we have. And that just really got me, because it's so true that unfortunately not every family is so loving and supportive and welcoming and kind-hearted. Sadly, there are families where there is abuse or neglect, and just that's tragic to think about. But with this family, just reflecting on that no matter what happens, they'll always be there for each other. That's such a beautiful, wonderful, absolutely something that you shouldn't take for granted, because we don't get to choose our family, but hopefully your family are people who you can always turn to in times of need, and just people who are there to just be there for you no matter what. So that's just a really beautiful thing that got me choked up, because I love my family. So that's just really, 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 really sweet. So I loved that. And with that is going to conclude this week's episode of Storytelling Saga. You can follow the podcast on Facebook and Instagram at Storytelling Saga, as well as on Twitter at Storytell Saga. You can also send me any questions, comments, or writing prompts by leaving me a message in the contact section of storytellingsaga.com, or by sending me an email at storytellingsaga@gmail.com. Next week, I'm making waffles. It's a double feature. I'll be discussing Shrek and Shrek 2. Until then, thank you for listening, and remember, write what you love.
The stars are falling from the sky, and you're the reason why the moon is shining on your face, 'cause it finally feels it's found its place. 'Cause baby, baby, I just wanna do you, do you wanna do me underneath the moonlight, baby, baby, maybe I will steal you, just so I can feel you, maybe that would heal you on me.